Welcome back to Football Unspoken, the Football Purist podcast. Rob, got a big trivia question for you to start us off. What is the German 50 plus 1 rule?
German 50 plus 1 rule. I'm going to be 100% honest and just go, I have no idea. He sent me a little hint on it and it's gone straight out of my mind.
No problem. So the German 50 plus 1 rule is a rule in Germany that means that all German clubs have to be at least 51% owned by fans of the football club. And therefore, the fans have ultimate decision when it comes to major changes or major decisions at the club, which is really interesting because the question for today is, should England and the Premier League adopt the 50 plus 1 rule for their clubs?
I think it's a difficult one because the thing about the German league, obviously, is that one of the big scandals at the moment is obviously RB Leipzig, who've come up and they use their money, and I think the culture around football is very different in Germany compared to the Premier League. And saying that, I do think that fans need a bigger say realistically because you're losing some of the bigger clubs are losing uh hardcore fan bases. I mean, Man United with Sir Jim Radcliffe are really struggling. There's loads of conversations around how poorly he's doing by ordinary people and by the fans. Arsenal are another one where their ticket prices are not being well received at all. Another one is obviously Tottenham with Daniel Levy, who's just berated pretty consistently. And I mean, even some of the more well-run teams, like in Newcastle at the moment, where obviously outside of the obvious in the fact that it's the Saudis and it is pretty mean. Yeah, what's I'm trying to be politically correct about the Saudis. I'll just say that. I'll say I'm trying to be politically correct about them. But obviously they've got their issues. But beyond that, they're raising ticket prices, and there's still conversations around whether that's right. So, do I think that 50% of the club should be owned by the fans? I'm not convinced. I don't think uh, with the money in the Premier League, I don't think that makes sense, and I don't know how you do it, to be entirely honest. But I do think there needs to be maybe you drop it to a 25%, maybe a 20%, and I think the fans need to have a bigger say.
Yeah, so I guess there's two conversations here. The first conversation is, should the Premier League do it? If a genie could just wave a wand and tomorrow there's 51% ownership of all Premier League teams, is it actually a good idea in the Premier League? That's one conversation. And then the second conversation is, how would you go about executing that? So going back to the first question about would it actually be a good idea? I believe it would, because you look at a lot of the owners of the Premier League, like I look at the Chelsea owners. Roman Abramovich probably actually ran Chelsea because he loved the club and he wanted the club to do well. I look at Todd Bowley, I'm not really convinced he has the interest of Chelsea Football Club and the fans and the players at heart. I think his big interest is, how much money can I make out of the football club? So is it FSG for Liverpool? Some abbreviation, whatever abbreviation it is for Liverpool. Let's not pretend they're in there because they love the city and they're scousers, and they're not. They're trying to make a buck, and so are the Arsenal owners, the Cronkies, you know, uh, whatever the dad's name is. He's going over to the son to run that football club because he couldn't care less. Basic Stan Kroenke is the father, and funny enough, the son's Josh, which is my name. But anyway, so he's given it over because they don't really care about the football club. They are trying to make money, and I'm not. This is not me going, oh, no one should want to make money. We live in a capitalist society, so of course they should. And I guess my point is, then therefore, with pretty much under 10% ownership from fans for most Premier League clubs, you've got this problem where there's so little fan voice coming into it to manage, or it's not about managing actually, it's just balancing out the viewpoints in the boardroom and ensuring we are building football clubs that are, one, sustainable, but also going in the right direction. I'll give you an example. In Germany, when the Super League came up, the big reason why the German clubs were pulled out of that Super League first was because of the 51% ownership by fans. They could just make the decision overnight, we're not doing it. And same for things around ticket prices, which you alluded to. So discussing the point around should the Premier League do it, if a genie could just wave the wand to make it happen, where do you stand on that before we talk about how you would execute it?
I'm still kind of a no, because it's a weird one where I sit there and I go, I think fans need a say 100%, but do I think that the average fan base has a sensible understanding of how a football club should actually be run? No, not really. And I mean, I sit there and I'm like, I'm a very hard maybe, and it's not a great place to be. But I sit there and I'm like, I understand the benefits. Football's nothing without fans. We saw that in 2020. We're still seeing it now. Fan bases make football. I know it adds to the atmosphere 150%. It adds to the players as well. Players move to clubs with bigger fan bases a lot of the time. You know, it's one of the big things that they talk about. So fans are such a huge part of football, 100%. But do I think that they need to be consulted on almost every decision? I'm not convinced. I think there's a lot of stuff that the fans don't really need to be involved in. And as soon as they do get involved, then it just makes it a bit of a palaver for everyone involved, really.
Rob's at the negotiation table going 25% final offer, take it or leave it, even for a hypothetical question. Rob's hardballing me with the negotiation. It was really funny. So the one other point I was just going to make on this whole ownership model was, I guess the dilemma you get into is that fans probably does what I think you were saying, is that they're going to angle or push for lower ticket prices, lower apparel prices in the stores, etc. What does that mean in the medium to long term for the club? The club has less revenue, and if the club has less revenue, they can probably afford lower wages and less transfers, or at least lower transfer budgets. And then your team, just statistically over a long period, if they have less money, will have lower results on average. So now your team performs worse, and then the fans get angry, and then they blame other people. So I think that is what you mean, particularly by you're not convinced the fans know how to run a football club, because we all want lower prices for tickets, apparel, etc. I think probably the owners do too. But there is a certain balancing act where if you never increase all the revenue sources, which includes the commercial and the stadium tickets, etc., the club can't make more money to then go buy more and more expensive players. And you can say, well, we're not playing that game. You know, we're not playing the paying high transfer fee price for players, but you're just going to be left behind because the other 19 Premier League teams are doing it. I think that, not to completely change gears here, but that's kind of what happened to Arsene Wenger at the end of his time at Arsenal for years and years. Even Klopp at Liverpool, for years and years, those two managers refused to pay the high transfer prices. They got to the end of their careers at that club, like managerial career at the club. And in Wenger's case, he realized you got to spend the money on an Ozil, on Alexis Sanchez, and Klopp realized you got to spend the money on a Van Dijk and Alisson because they make the difference. So that's where it comes back in, that the fans probably aren't looking in those kind of directions. They look at their own interests, which causes problems. Very quickly, in terms of implementation, let's say we go with your 25%. I agree. I shake Rob's hand. We're in for the negotiation for the 25%. How do you go about such? Do you have any thoughts of that? I know it's a very out there question, but is there any way that a football like independent group or something can start that process to hand over a percentage of the clubs to fans?
Well, I guess it depends. I don't really know too much about shares and buying shares and all that. But I know, for example, I mean, AFC Wimbledon are an entirely fan base owned club. So it's definitely possible to have your fans. I'm pretty sure most of these clubs are all public trading in some way, shape, or form. So it's definitely possible. I think the best way to do it realistically would be through like a trust. So, you know, you got the Newcastle United Supporters Trust. I'm sure Arsenal have a Supporters Trust. I'm sure Man United have a Supporters Trust. And I think it would be a case of you give 25% of it is given to that trust, and then it can be bought from the trust. You know, the fans can buy through the trust rather than through the club themselves. And then the trust is the one who is kind of on the board in that case. So I think that would be the only way really to get around it. You'd have to have a trust or a larger group involved.
Well, I don't have any like better ideas than that, to be honest. I don't think many of us do. The most of the debate is around should you go ahead, and then you can figure out later, are you actually going to do it? As most things happen in football. Oh, we're going to have a FIFA Club World Cup. No one wants to go to it, or we'll figure that out later. That kind of thing
Yeah.
in football. Anyway, this has been a really interesting debate, guys, about whether Premier League clubs should have the 50+1 rule introduced. Would love to hear your opinion on the topic. And until next time, this has been Football Unspoken. Cheers.